And all 5 of the murders generally attributed to Jack the Ripper. She's completed a detailed psychological analysis of the killer. John Grieve, formerly head of Scotland Yard's murder squad, has been pursuing his own lines of inquiry. He brings news of 2 developments. The first is the result of an attempt to extract DNA from some clothing that was said to have been taken from the body of Catherine Eddowes, the 4th victim. It offered a last chance, more than a century after the murders, to collect forensic evidence directly linked to the Ripper and his victims. But the tests did not reveal DNA.
Well, they haven't got anything useful. There's nothing we could use either evidentially or even from an intelligence point of view, so there's nothing helpful out of the DNA, and there isn't likely to be.
So that line is pretty much closed.
118 years passed since the murders. All the physical evidence has gone or been contaminated beyond use. And yet there's still plenty of evidence of the kind that doesn't decay. John's been re-examining witness statements.
There's a popular misconception that nobody ever saw the murderer here and he just vanished into the fog of London, but that's just not right. There were witnesses who were thought highly of at the time by the police.
13 different people gave descriptions of men seen near the crime scenes or with the victims shortly before the murders.
And of course there's problems with eyewitnesses, and there are problems with these eyewitnesses.
Some of these statements differ greatly. They're clearly describing different people. But many of them are similar enough that they could well be talking about the same man.
We could pull together all these descriptions and you could come up with a composite.
Working with the data from these statements and police reports, a digital artist has produced an e-fit of the kind used in modern criminal cases. 25 to 35 years of age, 5 feet 5 to 5 feet 7. This is the man that the police of 1888 should have been. Laura believes he was there, in Whitechapel, riding his luck. According to her psychological reading, this man was not the criminal mastermind of legend.
He's certainly no Einstein. We know that he's a risk-taker. He's impulsive, irresponsible. This is someone who hasn't been detected, and you can say 80% of that's probably due to chance and luck, and 20% may be down to his tactical planning around what he's done.
And yet, he's clever enough to balance his risks.
He also knows how to get out or leave the scene when things get too risky. We equally know that he's determined. You know, we've got 2 attacks, a double event in one night. He hasn't attacked Liz Stride, bungled it, and decided things are too risky. He's actually gone a mile away and attacked someone else.
The man she describes is socially skilled. It makes him efficient at targeting women.
You know, probably come across on a superficial level as being charming. He could get away with it to a degree, which doesn't rule him out of having short-term relationships with females.
Beneath the surface is a complete lack of normal emotion.
I think he'd certainly have a lack of empathy or remorse or levels of guilt about what he's done. I don't think he would be bothered. He certainly seems to see the victims as object.
It's the combination of these traits, charm, determination and ruthlessness, hidden by the ability to blend in, that makes him dangerous.
The key point is if he was so obvious, he would have been put into the inquiry time and time again by lots of different people. This guy, you know, he'd be unassuming, he'd be inoffensive, and he'd be right under their noses.
The place to hunt for him was close to his crimes in Whitechapel. But where? Laura asked geographic profiler Kim Rossmo to look at the case, and he now thinks he can identify the street where the killer was most likely to live. His geo-profiling system has been deployed by police forces around the world to track and catch serial offenders. He's run the 5 Ripper sites through it. The red zones, the peaks, indicate the places where the police should have focused their search.
And I can see that the peak area where the profile is covers Flower and Dean Street, Fashion Street, Thrall Street, here in the center of Whitechapel.
The highest point of the peak is Flower and Dean Street. The geoprofile says Jack the Ripper lived here. It's based purely on where the 5 women were killed. But it fits in perfectly with the story of their lives. Because in the year before the murders, each of them lived within 100 yards of this street. The police actually conducted house-to-house inquiries here after the Eddowes murder. No records survive of who they talked to. It's impossible to say just how close they got. But Laura believes that the Ripper would have been interviewed and discounted.
I would expect there to be some form of contact between her and the police. Many times I've heard officers say, I will know him when I see him, but in all those times it has never been correct because the offender isn't ever what they perceived him to be. He's someone who's been totally overlooked by very virtue of the fact he's so ordinary and so mundane, and I think that's the whole point here. He's committed an extraordinary set of offences, but he's probably quite an ordinary guy.
This may be as close as it is possible to get to the first modern serial killer. But if the police then had had the tools that are available today, things might have been different. Most of us would never have heard of Jack the Ripper. There would be no myth, no mystery.
Somebody who's sitting in the investigating officer's chair, if he'd had all the information that we could give him now, he'd have got it.
Next week, Revealed examines the personal home videos of one of history's most notorious dictators and gives them a voice. Hitler's Private World, Revealed, next Tuesday at 8 here on 5.